I'm Terry Cruz, and it's very much my pleasure to introduce to you and interview Clara Jane Matthews. Clara Jane, thank you. Oh, good morning. Thank you for letting us interview you about the Depression and the Dust Bowl era. And I'd like to start out with, who were your parents and what did they do for a living?
Well, I was very fortunate. My parents were Jenny Dunnigan Gotch, and my father was Dr. Irwin J. Gotch. He was a general surgeon here. My mother was born here and reared here, and they met at the University of Iowa. And he was in the First World War and came back. We had a new hospital then, and he was the first surgeon there.
Interesting. And did you know your grandparents?
Yes, very, very well. My grandparents were here. My Gotch grandparents moved here after my father settled here from Lamar's, Iowa, where they had lived, and they were Gustavus Adolphus and Clara Gotch, and my grandparents on the other side were John J. and Ella Dunnigan. And my grandfather was a very successful contractor who did building of bridges and sewers and water things and so forth, usually in St. Louis or Chicago, but he liked to live here. And even as he succeeded, he kept this as home.
I see. Well, my third question was, what brought your parents to Page County? Do you want to add anything to that? I mean, you really answered that question.
I think it was the original Dunnigan that came from Nebraska, where he had, my grandfather out there had a livery stable, and it had burned. And he just decided he needed someplace different, and they had just been married, I think, a year. My mother was born here. So they came here, and he had a very minor job with a plumber, but he worked up. things did well for him.
Well, good, good. Could you tell me which schools you attended here in Shenandoah, or were they in Page County?
Oh, yes. I went to Central School, and then I went to what was our old high school, where we had junior high and high school. And it was a very good time.
Sure.
Except we had nothing extra because it was when I was in high school, it was a depression.
Sure.
So we had no women's athletics or anything like that.
Well, I was going to ask you if there were any games or anything that you did at school that stand out.
We had a fine music program, and that was just marvelous because we had an orchestra and a band and good choruses, and I would sang and with the chorus and solo work, and we had contests that went up to the state level and then beyond, and this was very good for us, but nothing athletics, only the football and basketball for the boys. That was what we had.
Stepping back just a little bit, do you recall in your younger years any special toys you had or anything you played with as a young girl?
Well, I had a playhouse that my father had built in our backyard, and I loved it, and we moved when I was quite young and lived then at 308 Irwin Court the rest of my until I was married, and I loved this playhouse. And it's rather interesting because the man that built my first home in the country built the playhouse.
Oh, interesting.
Otto Spate was his name.
Do you remember any special birthdays? And if you do, how did you celebrate birthdays?
Yes, my mother was very strong on birthdays, and I had two younger brothers, and they were born on the same day, 3 years apart. So their birthdays were pretty noisy because we had two sets of boys there. Mine were quieter, but many of my birthdays, I'm an August birthday child, and were spent in northern Minnesota. My father liked to fish if he could get away from the telephone and patience and whatnot, and he liked it where it was very back to nature. And we fished, and we cooked over a kerosene stove, and the little house was out behind and things like that. It was really, and no telephone, only in the main lodge. And I did have nice birthdays, and my mother would make a blueberry pie when we were up there, because we really couldn't trust the stove for a cake. But I thought, oh, if I ever lived to be old enough to not spend all my birthdays in the northern woods, and now I'd be very happy to. But I've had birthdays all over the world, and it's been interesting. But we had nice ones when I was a little girl, with lots of, really small, with lots of friends.
And I'm curious to know, where were you on some of your other birthdays that you've been all over the world?
Oh, I've been in Greece, and I've been in Japan, and I've been in France, and I think I was in Russia one birthday, just different places.
Oh, fun. That's really fun. Can you tell us about any Christmases you remember? Were there any special presents, or what kind of food was served?
We always had a very traditional Christmas dinner, and there were 8 of us. My parents were both only children, so there would be my mother and father, the 3 children, and my 3 grandparents. My grandfather Dunnigan died at an early age, so I was only 8 and he was not there. And we always had turkey that with a chestnut dressing, and I can remember helping my mother peel those chestnuts. And it was rather a labor of love. It's sort of hard. And then we always had a steamed pudding that was called a suet pudding, one of my grandmothers made. And always the traditional cranberries and everything. And we had a very nice time. And I remember Christmas Eve, we always had scalloped oysters. So I still have them at my home.
Oh, interesting. I'm curious to know, did your steamed pudding have a sauce?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And then did you top it with whipping cream?
No, we quit with the sauce. That was it. But there was always a little brandy in the sauce.
There we go. Oh.
Little apricot brandy.
Oh, interesting. I'll have to try that. As a teenager, was there anything to do outside of school activities?
We made our own fun. I've thought about this a great deal because I was 10 years old in 1930, so in 1934, 35, as I was growing up, we had parties at home. And my friends were maybe a little better off, and we were than some. So my father used to say when I went on a date, he said, "There's lots of food at home. Don't ask that boy to buy anything more than your ticket to the show," because we went to lots of theaters, so, you know, lots of movies. So we always, my mother had plenty of food, and maybe he would buy me a Coke, and that would be all. We were very careful, and we all learned to dance, because that was dancing together. That didn't cost, or you could go someplace and put a nickel in the Nickelodeon and hear all this lovely kind of music that we like to dance to. We also learned, I think everyone learned to play bridge, and that didn't cost money.
Sure.
And we didn't have television. We played board games, and sledding in the winter. That was lots of fun. Everybody had a sled of some kind. And swimming, we did a lot of swimming. We always had a nice pool in Shenandoah, and my father was insistent that we learn to swim, each child, and he started teaching us when we were, I think, 3 years old. So we always swam, and we swam as a family, and we swam as groups of people and young people and all. And that was a very pleasant thing to do when it was very hot in the summer.
Because of lack of air conditioning, yes.
You went to the movies because you had air conditioning. One place it was air conditioned.
And can you tell me, were there any favorite movies? Did you see Gone with the Wind? Or?
Oh yes, of course, but that was in 1939 that came out. And I don't know, a lot of the Goldwyn follies, or so there are lots of dancing, you know, and I was trying to think of the name of the man that had arranged for the dances, and these were very cleverly done, and then of course Astaire and Ginger Rogers, that we loved that, and Nelson Eddy and Jeanette MacDonald, who sang so well in different kinds of movies. It was for lots of things, and Myrna Loy, and I cannot think the names of the movies,
Sure.
but we went to lots of them. We knew the movie stars, and this was fun.
Those are still my favorite today,
They're
by
quite
far,
good.
by far. Did you see any, oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to back up. What did you do after high school graduation?
After high school graduation, I was very lucky. I was a very blessed child because I had been in 1935 on a long trip to the Mediterranean with my grandmother and mother, and going as far east as Egypt and what was then Palestine, and then through Europe. We were gone all summer, and then after graduation, my grandmother and I went to the British Isles for the summer. And of course, everything was by ship then. It didn't fly till the Second World War, but I think it was quite imminent. And 2 weeks in London, I remember the many, many wonderful things in the museums. My grandmother was good about this. We saw lots of those. But also it was a time the English were having a difficult time. And I remember going by Wallace Warfield's home, Wallace Warfield Simpson, and she was the one who married the king. And she was not popular, and they had thrown lots of things at the house. And this was the summer of '38. But also, at that time, the ambassador to the court of St. James was Mr. Kennedy, and later, of course, his son was our president, and that family was there. And I believe that our president then was just maybe in college at the time,
I see.
38.
Did you see any other signs of the Depression while traveling abroad?
Yes, I think so. I think so. It was a difficult time everywhere. You must remember I was pretty young, but I was also aware that we didn't want to throw our weight around of being able to buy this or buy that, because it was a very tough time. I think Europe was having a very difficult time, and in 1935, going across Europe, my grandmother and mother kept remarking how much it had changed since they had been there in 28, I think it was 28, 20, and they said how that the evidence of the Hitler rise was there, the Nazi rise was very, very much so. And of course in Italy it was, we saw all the soldiers with the white uniforms and black boots of Mussolini, and in the ports there the ships were going out to fight the war against Haile Selassie in Ethiopia.
I've always read that Germany was the hardest hit of the continent, and I just wondered if you had any additional
I think
comment.
by the time that we were there in '35, the Nazi influence was so great that it was, yes, it was difficult, but finally their money was stabilized to some degree, and I think people probably went along with what was happening because of that. It was one thing. But you must realize I wasn't very old. I was 14 and I wasn't even 15 yet, and seeing it was something else. And not too many tourists. There were some tourists, but not a lot.
I absolutely love your stories. I could listen to you all day, and you know that. My next question is, where did you go to college?
I'm at the University of Iowa, and I think it's interesting, too, that after I had been in Europe in 1935 and 1936, I spent the summer at the University of Iowa in a music program, which I got some credit for, and it was we lived in what had been a nurse's annex on the east campus, and no air conditioning. It was very hot. We worked hard, and it was a summer of great drought and great heat in Iowa. And we had a concert down at the Union, and I was singing in the soprano section and the girls were kind of falling like leaves